Okay. Hello, everybody. This is.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, that got me. Uh, this is episode 4 of On the Couch. And we are back to talking about style here. We're going to be specifically talking about playing to lift, which for a lot of people may be kind of a nebulous term. What does that mean? What does it mean to play to lift? Well, we'll get into that. But first, introductions. So, Celine, if you would like to start.
Hi. I am in fact silent. I like to roleplay in VR, mostly because that's pretty much the only place I've roleplayed in for about 3 years now. I've played in a bunch of roleplays. I've hosted a bunch of roleplays at this point, kind of been around the block. And more than anything, I enjoy talking about roleplay stuff. And well, that is why we are here, on this particular couch at the gym. Yeah.
Yeah, we rented out this gym. That's why it's
Yep.
empty. It is also uh, early in the morning where we are. We've chosen a time zone where we can be early in the gym, so we're not inconveniencing too many people. But we have the news up on the left, so we're learning quite a bit about this area as we go along. So pretty great. But that being said, I'm Solus. Hello, hello. I'm running out of ways to introduce myself besides I've been role playing in VR for 4-ish years, and I too enjoy talking about roleplay as a lot of what I've been doing lately. A lot less role playing nowadays, especially now that I moved to this new apartment. I haven't even set up the base stations yet. It's been like, I don't know, 3, 4 days. So it'll be a matter of time before I do that. But I specifically chose a place with a pretty big play space room. So it'll be very nice when I do set it up. But until then,
Hmm.
we're here talking and not yet role playing.
Hmm.
All right.
All right,
Uh,
yeah, all right. I suppose we are here to talk about playing to lift. So, yeah. Um, I think even before we talk about like playing to lift in particular, I think we wanted to talk a bit about like the alternatives, right? Like the things that you can play for.
mhm. Well, that's a good reminder. Jamie's telling us to hydrate.
Thank you, Jamie. It'd be especially important with all these weights around.
That's true. Yeah, especially if you're lifting, working out, hydrate often, early, after, stretch. Anyways,
Yep.
so
So yeah,
alternatives, right?
yeah, playing to lift is, I suppose, we're back to style. This is, I guess, the style of role play. Um, in the sense where I suppose we won't quite as hard die on this hill as we did with like safety, but playing to lift is a style of play that essentially you elevate other people in your scene. You elevate each other. And I suppose in order to specifically talk about what that means, let's talk about the alternative, which is, well, playing to win.
Mm-hmm. An alternative, right?
An alternative, yeah.
So playing to win. Well, we'll go ahead and define that first, right? So playing to win, like the wording says, anyone can easily interpret, is playing to achieve a victory in a scenario, or playing to uh, benefit from a scenario in some way. Now, the as we said is an alternative. It kind of encompasses a goal of a player within a scene, what kind of approach they're taking to it, right? So playing to win, playing to lift. What makes playing to win very different is, well, someone who's playing to win is looking for achieving usually personal goals, right? Progressing something like maybe maybe they're looking to progress an ability, or maybe they're looking to gain something material for their character. We want to uh, also very quickly specify when we're talking about playing to win and playing to lose, we're talking about this in the context of the player. So a player win would be something that the player enjoys, right? Uh,
Right. So like pretty much any role play. Role plays are inherently a collaborative activity, right? This kind of sets them apart from like other types of games on which like if I'm going to go and like play like a competitive shooter, that's like a PvP game. I, the player, am trying to like win against another player, right? There's like a
hmm,
goal in the game, and like I am trying to achieve victory, right? In a role play, characters might be fighting, right? Characters might be against each other in a role play, but what kind of sets role plays apart is that um, because you don't really necessarily have that sort of like you don't necessarily have like a hard game to back up any sort of player versus player conflict. What you have instead is some agreements, right? You have some social agreements in the form of your your magic circle, where you all agree to come together and play this game together, right? So in that, even before you get started, right? It doesn't matter like kind of what your role play is about. If you're doing role play, your game is essentially inherently collaborative, at least in theory, right? Um, Playing to win is when a player kind of takes it upon themselves to kind of flout that social contract, right? You instead of being like, okay, we're all here to tell a story together, um, you you essentially make moves in a way. You make moves like in character and out of character in a way to benefit yourself, the player, not even necessarily your character, right? Because obviously, the character may want to, benefit themselves, and that makes sense. But it's when the player makes moves to benefit themselves without considering y- other things. That's what playing to win is.
uh-huh. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up,
Mhm.
right? It is very much the player seeking to find those wins, oftentimes at the expense of things around them and the social
Yeah.
contract that we all sort of enter as we agree to join these role plays. Right? It's very much a social contract, which isn't really spoken a lot about, uh, but it is the sort of agreement that you'll usually see these rules uh, at the beginning of joining a roleplay server and saying like no metagaming, no power gaming, all that kind of stuff, and a lot of that kind of plays into this general larger idea of, well, there is this sort of implicit and should be explicit social contract that when you enter the world in character, that you are agreeing to play by these rules, that this agreement that specifically is made for people to work together,
Mhm.
regardless of what kind of style that they are uh, using at that point in time. Which, to step back just a little bit, the goal of even defining this sort of type of play to begin with is so that there is a shared style to begin with, right? I if you this is where kind of the stylistic part comes in, right? Like if you have an environment where you don't necessarily need that social contract, if you have that put the kind of maybe you have a, for example, kind of a gameplay first sort of experience where you are playing a role but it's not necessarily about that, then playing to win can fit that sort of sort of experience, which is not what we are aiming for with Couchform, but it does fit that. But that being said, defining that is what you're going for is still important because that creates a shared style that people can like talk about and use with each other, right? Because otherwise you're dealing with these like really inconsistent sorts of standards for like, well, what is the type of role play that is expected in this space, and how do you know to actually aim for that? It's a lot of guessing.
Yeah. I suppose as like one more note on playing to win here, I would like to emphasize, that because playing to win is not necessarily like when we say play to win, right? Obviously you as a player can win like in a role play, and like in fact that I would recommend that if you're in a role play that you do things that you enjoy, right? And if like you're not enjoying the role play, then you probably should do things differently. I suppose a specific aspect of playing to win is that if you're doing this right, if you're kind of taking wins without considering other people, or maybe or maybe only considering a very small group of people and not caring about anybody else, or if you are taking wins for the sake of winning, right? Motivated for the sake of like winning something as if it were a competition rather than a collaborative experience. So yeah, when I suppose it should probably come off as we're talking here that we might not be the biggest fans here of playing to win, but very importantly, we're not trying to say that you should play to your own detriment. And I suppose playing to your own detriment here is I guess what we want to talk about next, probably, right?
Good segue.
Yeah.
Yeah, playing to lose.
The yeah, so-called playing to lose, right? You might think it's the opposite of playing to win, right? Where we were just saying that playing to win is, we don't think it's the best way to go about things. We don't think it's a particularly or rather we think it is kind of against the it goes against kind of like the DNA of roleplay as a collaborative medium. But I will also turn around and say that I think playing to lose is also not the best way to go about things, right? Playing to lose being when you're playing specifically to your own detriment
Mm-hmm.
in one way or another.
I think like a big thing to recognize about both of these is that they are effectively extremes. All right, playing to win being you take your wins at the expense of others, playing to lose being you take losses, you sacrifice for others to succeed regardless of the circumstances. And playing to lift kind of sits right in between that. But let's I wanna kind of do the point by point on like playing to lift and playing to lose, because those actually like this is something that I struggled with a little bit when I first learned about playing to lift and trying to wrestle with the differences here. So like let's talk about playing to lift first, and let's actually like do a point by point, right?
Yeah.
So
Let's play to lift, not just to lose.
yeah. So what is playing to lift? Well, playing to lift, like Silent mentioned before. God, Silent. I'm sorry. This is a bit of an aside. The many different ways to pronounce your name gets me every time. I'll stick with mine though. So, playing to lift is a method of play that focuses on lifting other players, the setting, or the narrative. And a well accepted traditional method of playing to lift is making conscious, out of character decisions to favor the scenario, which costs a small amount of immersion, but usually benefits from more fulfilling character drama. So this is basically reworded or paraphrased exactly from the Couchform principle number 4, what we have written on it. That effectively encompasses like what Playing to Live really is this sort of stepping back, recognizing the scenario around and what's going on, and then playing to lift that scenario, or the people within it, or the narrative that's going on within it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like now we're gonna do the point by point here because we talked about Playing to Lose, kind of also being this point of giving others kind of this uplifting experience too, and that then begs the question like what really is the difference? So,
in I suppose in my mind, like the kind of the main difference is kind of like the difference of motivation, right? Like if like I hear play to lose is essentially the idea that you as a player should basically you should allow your character to lose, right? Um,
mm,
and not only should allow, but also should occasionally go out of your way to have your character lose so that other people can take wins. Um, what does that mean? Well, essentially, imagine you have a character, you have other characters around you. You know, different characters have different opinions. Different characters might want to get their way. What playing to lose would suggest is that sometimes it is better for you to be the one to cave, right? And you to allow other characters to win, kind of take an in-character win above your character. And this in this context, you know, it might be, you know, a fight, it might be like a verbal argument, it might just be, you know, letting the other person kind of like feel like they have, or the other character kind of feel like they have control of the situation, and like your character doesn't have control of the situation, right? um Rather than, you know, two different characters fighting for control of the situation. That's what playing to lose kind of suggests, is that you actively set up your own character to fail in these different circumstances.
so I'm a bit curious. Can you think of like an anecdote of where that difference kind of like really shines, like a Playing to Lose sort of scenario that didn't feel, I guess, appropriate to the situation?
Well, I think I can, right? Because I think I can, and then I've seen this happen a bit. Especially happens in circles that love the sort of, you know, type 2 fun, where you're kind of exploring like negative emotions or like, you know, negative things, right? What you can sometimes get is you can get players, you can get characters who are kind of like tripping over each other to be the ones to lose, right? It's like, you know, imagine kind of like the door, where like you have the two people in front of the door and it's like, no, you go first, and then the other person's like, no, you go first, and then the first person like, no, I insist you go first. And you kind of get stuck in this kind of like loop of people who like really want their characters to lose, and you kind of and it ends up kind of going nowhere. um I suppose I haven't seen this very often. Like I haven't seen this very, very, very often. But I have actually seen this a bit, I think, when I run like 10 Candles, for example, in that game. That's like it's a storytelling tabletop game. And I think I see that a bit where like I think we've kind of gotten the vibe mostly that like people are like most people aren't trying to play to win, but then you end up having players kind of try to give so much space to everyone else, and everyone else is also trying to give space to them, and no one really knows how to take, you know, take the win, and therefore nobody ends up winning
So
in that sort of feedback loop.
these players have effectively created the space for the mosh pit, but no one's moshing. It's just an empty circle.
Mhm.
Y'all gotta start marching. That's that's what we gotta do.
That's an analogy. That's a
Yeah, yeah. There it is, right? So, but the I think the point that I made the distinction was when I recognized that the major difference is like the situational awareness, right?
Mhm.
If I'm always playing to lose, then the other person recognizing that I have already decided to lose a scenario will not necessarily feel that great about achieving a win in the scenario where I am also involved because they already know that that's basically guaranteed, right? But the situation doesn't always call for that, and that brings me to the example. And I want to that this is we have notes here for the schedule of the podcast.
The example
In
TM.
here, and I wrote the example TM because this is something that I thought up in the shower yesterday, and it's a very, very kind of bare bones framework sort of example, but it gets more and more specific as we go along. So just consider this, right? Just picture it in your mind. Player A is a player that plays a character with authority. That this player has authority over player B, not directly, but the player B has less status and has done something that basically means that they are being punished by person A or player A. Player C is someone that everyone in the roleplay is aware has a character themed toward being the hero, succeeding in a given scenario, saving someone or defying player A. 4,000 push-ups right now? No, that is too many. Uh, so the scene is set, right? You have player A that has the authority character, player B that has the lower status character, and player C that wants to defy character A. So the play to live scenario then, and now we're going to do a little mental exercise. What should happen here, right? If we all know player C wants to be the hero in this situation, and the setting actually does support that this person does succeed in this scenario, then I'll pitch it to you, Solon. What do you think happens here?
Um.
Doesn't have to be like super complex, just like a thought of what might happen.
So I suppose in in which context are you asking? The what does happen or the what should happen?
Just an example of what might happen, like something that sort of fits the vibe of playing the lift here.
Hmm.
And this will build more and more. So again, it doesn't need to be a full answer. It could just be like, something happens, and then we add more. Because we are this example does add more to the scene
Yeah,
too.
well, I mean, you can totally, I think, I'm sorry, one.
Sure. Yeah, for those listening, go ahead and just picture it, right? You've got serious thing is happening. Uh, no worries. So just kind of picture it, right? You have player with authority, you have player with less authority, and you have the third person that is kind of the hero of the scenario. So just kind of picture it, right? I'll go ahead and kind of answer, so then we move on to the extension of the example. That by everyone in the roleplay recognizing that the roleplay kind of allows for this sort of heroic victory, and B, players understand that player C wants to achieve that by being the defier, to character A, then naturally it makes sense for character C to be able to interrupt this situation and save character B from this predicament that they're in. Right. So they step in. They might be the ones to kind of achieve this sort of like really dramatic victory. This sort of like kind of dramatic plot ensues where character A then maybe wants to get revenge against them or whatever. Like this things can kind of go on from there. That's kind of a good like very bare bones playing to live sort of scenario. And you could also think of that as like a playing to lose as well. This is still very bare bones, so it's kind of a gray area. Now, the extension is where it gets a bit interesting. Now, I may have to repeat this for when Sylvan ends up returning, but I will say it up front so it gets everyone's brains thinking. So player D plays someone in service to player A. Now, in service, that means they are working for player A. They are working under the authority of player A, where character B was not working under their authority. They're just lower status. Player D is. So they are responsible under character A. And so, same scenario. Player C has effectively done their have started their attempt at being the hero of a scenario. What do you do as player D?
Um. That's a good question. In service to.
Mm-hmm. So
It's getting
to kind of set a more specific scene, so this isn't just like the most abstract thing possible. Let's say where we'll look potentially medieval, right? Player A is playing a lord. Player B is a peasant that maybe just raided the food stores, so they're getting punished for it publicly. Player C is a another peasant who maybe is a close friend of character C, or sorry, character B, and then player D is playing a guard for player A. So
I think I actually will have an easier time answering this one. Like here's how like I view I suppose it depends on the exact situation, but I'll make the assumption here that our like Lord character, right? Our Lord character wants to appear powerful and intimidating, and I'll also make the assumption that our like hero character kind of like wants to be, you know, heroic and like save the day here. A big part of sort of playing a sort of like a villainous or like antagonistic character. I'm going to quote Neon Alligator here, where like you don't really play a villain in the sense where like a villainous character is not really up to how you act. It's all about how others react.
mm-hmm.
If you're playing a sort of like if you're like trying to be this like lord who's kind of like big and intimidating, you can try to be big and intimidating, but like if everybody around you is kind of just like laughing at you, then you know, then your character is just a joke. On the other hand, you know, if everybody's like, you know, quaking in their boots, then you know, that's what makes a sort of a character feel powerful and intimidating. And like in this context for player D, I feel like backing up player A, right? Backing up the Lord would make player A feel more intimidating and more powerful and more in control. And it would also make player C, right, the hero who's coming into the rescue, feel more satisfied because like now the threat is bigger, right? Like you're the sort of the stakes are bigger, right? It's this character, player A, is not just, someone like laughing stock. They're like a serious threat if you back them up, right? Um, so like in that sense, player D, I think, has the opportunity to kind of like lift everybody here, basically,
Hmm.
by playing their cards right, and supporting their lord, but like in a way that like still allows others to do their things.
So you said basically the key point, and I trusted you to basically say it, but the point of why this is like I don't want to say the right answer because obviously there's an infinite amount of things you can do, but it is certainly a really good way of playing to lift a scenario because it lifts everything within it,
Hmm.
right? It lifts a lot of very key points, right? This player A, excuse me, player A has this sort of authority that needs to be supported somehow by how others react to it, and that is supported by this person acting in their service and showing that level of authority. And they also lift player C, who may still be given that sort of victory down the road, that there is some sort of resistance to it because there is that kind of authority that allows player D to kind of act in defense of this situation. Whereas then this is what my brain was kind of mulling on when I was having this sort of like example shower thought is like the playing to lose scenario is really detrimental to this scene because the play to lose sort of scenario here would effectively be to say, well, the person who is seeking the win here should get this win, so I give it to them. Right? This player C attempting to make this rescue, I will not resist them making this rescue. But that on its own very heavily detriments a lot of things, right? It it detriments the authority of the player A, the Lord. It lessens the experience and resistance and kind of authority that player C would be pushing against. So, and then it also like generally looking at the scenario, right? And this is why we say play lift the scenario, right? The scenario suffers as a result because this becomes a detail that you can look at and say, well, this situation seemed a little bit weird. It didn't make enough sense because there was an inconsistency here. Even though the attention was given to giving this player the win that they were looking for and trying to play to lift their experience and getting their win, the situation suffered, and then that means the scene suffered. And this is the kind of difference that we look at when we think, well, the personal playing to lift is good and all, but when you're looking at the sort of larger situation, kind of the situational awareness of determining what the direction of a scene is, what kind of themes are being talked about and played with within the setting that this scene happens in, and then making those decisions to push in certain directions based on that. That's playing to lift the scenario.
Hmm. I suppose in that sense, like the definition that I like to kind of function under, right? It's like here around here we do and we've explicitly talked about kind of like players taking responsibility for their own fun, right? We've explicitly talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
But like playing to lift essentially is like a step beyond just taking responsibility for your own fun. And it's when you take responsibility for your own fun and also for the scenario, right? And the scenario might be the current scene, might be the themes of the role play, and like, the people in your like immediate vicinity, right? It's you're essentially like thinking of things like one step beyond just yourself, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think yeah, and I think that the example TM here, I think that's a really good example, even if it's a little bit convoluted, right? I think that's a really good example because like that a hard and fast rule is not really doesn't really work, right? Like playing to lose all the time doesn't always work, and in fact sometimes you want to have that situational awareness where like, okay, I'm going to make everyone's role play, including my own, like way, way, way better if I take this win.
Mhm.
Um, where like everyone else is going to be like, wow, that's cool. And then for you, now you're just in a cool scene, right?
Yep.
The the Lord feels cool because they're being backed up. The peasant who's in trouble feels cool because like they get to be in the stakes are high, they're like in some like serious trouble, and then like the hero feels cool because like they just rescued this person from like a serious threat, and our guard feels cool because they're in this scene, and this scene is really cool, right? um and so like everyone around you is like just having a great time, so it kind of spreads.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like the the one the one major argument that I've always heard against playing the lift is generally like, how can I, if I am not being lifted by other players, what is the worth of putting the energy myself to lift others? And that I generally think stems from like having an environment where it's not the focus for players to kind of share that with each other. But then there is also the thought of, well, in our form of the way that we think about it, the way we think about playing a lift, it generally means that whatever you do to lift a scenario means that scenario is going to be better as a whole.
Mhm.
So if you are in the scenario and you're playing to lift the scenario, then you will enjoy the scenario more after the effort that you put into it, regardless of whether it is your win in the end or not. It is just a better scene. So you're going to be enjoying the scene more. So it's just
Mhm.
net positive. Why not do it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, role play is very much not a zero sum game, right? One person having fun doesn't require you to take the fun away from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, role play does not work like that. Um, if you lift the scene that you are in, right? You are in this scene and you lift it. Well, now you're just in a better scene, right? And it doesn't matter if nobody else is lifting the scene. If you successfully lift the scene that you are in, you are now just in a better scene than the one that you were in before. And so like you just inherently like make your time better with the benefit of also making everybody else's time better.
Exactly. So we've talked a lot then about like, what playing the lift is. And I'm a bit curious, Silent, because you've been you've been a part of the admin for Warp, right? And Warp, from my
Mhm.
understanding, was like the first step toward bringing this sort of principle into existence. And it's actually like, as a personal note, Warp was the roleplay that got me into thinking about roleplay principles because I had never even heard about playing to live before then. So I wanna get to understand like what was your kind of introduction to it? Did you like know what playing to lift was before, or like if you didn't, like what was it like learning about that? And like how'd you process it?
Um, well, that's a fun story. I don't actually know if like I don't know if like Worlds Apart was like the first step in this direction. Certainly not, because like I mean,
Mm.
the idea is specifically right. The idea is specifically taken from um, kind of the Nordic harp culture.
Yeah, I meant for
And
like
actually,
VR.
I've already quoted it like in this thing. I've already quoted an article or the title of an article called "Play to Lift, Not Just to Lose." I said that explicitly earlier because in the development for Worlds Apart, like in approximately like the year leading up to the announcement of Worlds Apart, like myself, Ames and May, we essentially were just doing research. We were doing research into other roleplay cultures as much as we could, namely LARP, right? Like mostly LARP, but other roleplay cultures. Like we had, like obviously, Nordic LARP has a lot of material written about it, but like we had even done stuff like we attended like a LARP conference, which was at that point being hosted online due to COVID. We attended like a US like a LARP designers conference, and like kind of heard what other cultures and other communities were doing, and there was this like very strong idea of playing to lift, right? And there was also an idea of playing to lose, right? But there was this very strong idea of playing to lift amongst all these cultures, and we were like thinking to ourselves and kind of like looking at the current state of roleplay in VR at the time, and kind of comparing and contrasting, and like a lot of VR roleplay um, felt very like, I know I just said roleplay isn't zero sum, but a lot of VR roleplay did feel zero sum. There's this concept in our community, this word called plot chasing.
Mhm.
And plot chasing, for anybody who doesn't know the term, is the concept of somebody who essentially goes out and seeks out plot for themselves. Um, and I was introduced to this concept as like a negative thing, right? You shouldn't seek out plot for yourself. You should allow, uh, or rather, as sorry, this is I was introduced to this concept as a person who's playing like non-player characters, right, NPCs. That you as an NPC should not seek out plot for yourself. You should allow the main characters to like bring you into the plot, right? And that feels pretty zero sum, right? That feels like that like vibe feels like there is only enough fun to go around for like a certain number of people, right? And playing to lift kind of like challenged that idea. It really challenged that idea to the core. And in our research for like like LARP, we had actually stumbled into the word plot hoarding. I have never, not a single time, still to this day, heard of like people in the VR space really use plot hoarding, except when referring to like IRL LARPs. But it's literally the opposite thing. Plot hoarding in a LARP context is when a player kind of has their plot and sits on it and doesn't share it with others. And this is what's seen as a negative, right? It's not just expected that you should take your fun into your own hands and seek out the plot. In fact, it was looked down upon if somebody like has some like plot relevant stuff and sits on it and doesn't share it with others. And that I think kind of fell in with the sort of playing to lift, where roleplay is not a zero sum game. There's enough fun for everybody to go around. You won't miss out if you make other people's scenes and other people's role plays better, because you are just making your own role play better as well, like by proxy. And yeah, so in like the year leading up to Worlds Apart, we did all of this research and just were very, very influenced by a lot of what we had read and a lot of the people that we had spoken to. And so we tried, and I suppose I'm not sure, how well we succeeded, but we at least tried to like make that an official stance of Worlds Apart, that this would be a play to lift role play. This would be explicitly a role play in which you're kind of expected to take responsibility for your own fun, but also for your immediate surroundings, right? Make the role play better for those around you.
Mhm. I do wonder hearing about this, like, I've we've talked about this difference in like perspectives of like plot hoarding versus plot chasing, right? And I
Hmm.
wonder how much of it is based on like player limits on modules and how that's kind of like grown to become an issue. Because like I could step like 5 steps back on like the slippery slope scale and say like the reason why that's a problem to begin with is because there's not enough kind of a thematic basis for people to even enjoy what happens on kind of a main point, that the plot kind of events and modules that happen on map or outside of the map become like the main interest. But then again, like just thinking about that, if we kind of scope that as like, this is what people are looking to do, therefore everyone's going to try to be a part of this thing that may or may not pertain to them, and therefore for the sake of this, like, I guess common understanding that there needs to be a limitation on it, therefore it becomes, well, we're limiting it by pushing people away from these sorts of events. It becomes like the focus of how we view plot versus like the other side where an IRL LARP, they rather maybe don't have this issue at all, because they don't GM the same way that we do, because we have different tools. We can be invisible. We can be disembodied voices, right? Um, and so like they don't have that. They GM very differently, and so because it is very different, it behooves them more to involve people more than it does to exclude them.
I don't know if I would go so far as to say that, like, I certainly, hesitate usually to speak on IRL LARP because, well, I've never done IRL LARP. I don't know what goes on there. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think it might be a bit hasty to kind of come to the conclusion that they don't have the problem, in the same sense of, like, I personally think that, the VR roleplay space has definitely has a problem with plot hoarding, even though we don't really use that term. In that same sense, IRL LARP might have a problem with plot chasing, even though in all of our research we could not find a single use of that word. So it's really a mystery of like where it came from and like how these two terms developed.
Hmm.
Um, but in that sense, it's not so much about like which term exists. It's more of like the mindset that leads you to using this term, right? Which one is the problem, right? Is it is it the person going out and like seeking their own fun that's the problem, or is it the person who's not sharing with others that's the problem? Which one do you need the term to define? It's like an entirely different mindset, and that's kind of the mindset and the philosophy that or like one of the philosophies that we kind of took to heart for Worlds Apart was um essentially considering um that we want people to share, we want people to have fun together. And yes, there is enough fun to go around for everybody, right? Everybody can be a main character, or everybody can feel like a main character. And one person having a cool moment does not exclude others from having a cool moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's the essence of playing to lift.
So like, was this like your first foray into roleplay theory?
Um, well, my first roleplay into roleplay theory was when I was kind of uh, contracted to work on like dice stuff, but very quickly, very quickly, it went from like dice stuff to this.
It feels like there may have been at least a couple steps in between. I
Um,
got you.
maybe I don't know. It was a very rapid process. Um, but yeah.
Are you referring to like Stardust?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
I have a document. Oh gosh, I should post this. I have a document that I wrote on like dice and its mechanics like years ago with I actually should go back and read that. That would be fun because it's kind of like you write things down to then like 2 or 3 years later you read it again and you're like, oh gosh, I what did I write? This is
Mhm.
awful. This is terrible. You know that's why you write stuff down so you can like retroactively cringe at yourself.
True.
Um but yeah, I suppose that is a bit off topic. We will probably talk about game mechanics and dice on a later episode.
Oh yeah, that one's that's gonna be a big one too, right?
Hmm.
So I guess moving forward then, and this is gonna be a pretty big one too. So before we get there,
Hmm.
uh, I guess a small intermission here to remember to hydrate, as Jamie
Yep.
very uh very what's the word I'm looking for? Wisely informed us to do. That's the word. Why did wise take me so long to get to? Anyways, uh remember to hydrate, and again, if y'all have any questions, just go ahead and pop into the chat here on the Twitch channel or in the podcast channel in the Myriad server. I have some coconut pineapple by antioxidant. It's really good. I recommend it. I am not sponsored. I just enjoy the drink.
Hmm.
Okay. So, this is a pretty big topic, and I feel like we'll definitely talk about this one for a very long time. Um,
Hmm.
but
Yep.
we kind of glanced over it earlier, right? Like we talked about what playing the lift requires, and what it requires is that step back to assess the situation using whatever knowledge you know from a meta perspective about the situation to figure out what the direction of the scene looks like it is, and then acting in accordance with that based on all the stuff that you know. And that piece that we haven't really covered yet is that meta knowledge, right? Like
Hmm.
what do we look at when we kind of take that step back and look at this scene? Like what kind of knowledge can we use, and how can we reconcile that with what we know as metagaming?
Situational awareness. Well, I can tell you a little story of the moment. I still remember, the moment I became radicalized in this sense. Of course, we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about metagaming in this context. As little as like a few years ago. It's approximately 3 years ago now, a little under that. When I first came into this community, I was like really, trying to figure out like how people operate, how like role players are run, what are the best practices, what do you do? Something that I got told essentially at like every turn, at every role play, was don't metagame. And the way metagaming was defined to me was essentially using out of character knowledge um, in character. That's the way it was defined to me. Um, I suppose what was often left off, the definition is that when most people were talking about metagaming, um, what they were actually complaining about was people using out of character knowledge in character to personally benefit themselves at the detriment of others, i.e., playing to win. That's what they were actually complaining about. But that's not how it was defined to me. The way it was defined to me was using out of character knowledge in character. That's metagaming. That's bad. You shouldn't do it. You should stay immersed in the scene. You should not go and seek out information like out of character. You should not like know what other people are up to. If like some other character has plans, those plans are secret. You shouldn't be aware of what they're doing. In fact, it's better roleplay. You're going to be able to do better roleplay if you the player do not know what other people are doing. Um, this was sort of the narrative and the definition that I was given on my way into the community. Now this has changed a little bit in the meantime, but I still remember like the moment where I learned that this view on things quite frankly, it's just wrong. Like it really is, right? There is a very legitimate, concern about, playing to win, because playing to win can be very destructive to a role play, right? But metagaming and meta knowledge in this context, absolutely not. So this was a moment in gang roleplay. Forget exactly the context of the scene, but we had just gone on a mission and gotten like some MacGuffin. I forget what it was. What it is not really important. What was important is we were all kind of in the basement of the base, and there was like a little jail cell there. We were all kind of crammed into this room, and we needed the MacGuffin, basically. And I, or rather my character, was sent to retrieve it. I did not know where the MacGuffin was in character. I did not know who had it last, so I didn't know like who to ask. So there I was being like, okay, I don't know where this thing is. And in my mind, what I had to do at that moment was go and find it. I was doing this for like, 5 or so minutes, at which point, a good friend of mine, Lone One Ranger, they like were essentially sent to come and get me because I had been taking so long. And they kind of like came to me, were cards down, were like asked me what was going on. I told them what was going on, and then they were like, let's just say we found it here. And then they're like, okay, we found it here. And we went back and gave the MacGuffin, and we went and just had the scene, and it continued as normal, right? Um, that scene really stuck with me. Like, I really thought about it afterwards, right? Because at the time, I was doing essentially what I thought was like following the rules, right? It was like, I don't know where this thing is. My character doesn't know where this thing is. How am I going to go and find it? But then also, right, I was also cognizant that like they were waiting on this for a scene, but like I wasn't confident to like just go and say I found it, because that was metagaming. That was the big evil. That was the thing that you never do, right? Lest you be a bad role player, right? But then now I think about it, right, and it's just like it's really silly, right? Why did we even have this MacGuffin in the first place? Well, the reason we had this MacGuffin in the first place was to have this scene, right? That was the only reason that and it was in character being sent to find the MacGuffin, was so that we just like keep up the pretense, keep up the role play, keep up the social contract, so we can have this scene together, right? And finding it was of no consequence other than to enable this scene to happen. And so like by worrying about like where it was, I was essentially like making other people kind of wait there doing nothing and bored, right? That doesn't really do anything for anybody. And so I was really glad when my friend was then sent after me, and they were just like, okay, we find it here. um because why bother making people wait to have this cool scene when you can just get the MacGuffin, you can just take it downstairs, and now we can have the scene, and everything continues on as normal, right? Um, that was the moment, essentially, when I was like, okay, metagaming is not bad. And to kind of drive this point home, there is a term that's commonly used in the Nordic LARP scene. The term is called steering. Usually, when I say the word steering, I don't even need to define it, because the person that I'm telling it to is just like, oh, that makes sense. But I'll define it anyway. Essentially, steering is essentially metagaming. It is using out of character information to steer a scene in a certain direction, right? Ideally, in a direction that's more fun for the people in it and yourself. You can use your out of character knowledge to make decisions that will benefit your enjoyment of the role play and the enjoyment of others around you. And that's fine. It is having the situational awareness to be able to steer your scenes in a, I suppose, in a good direction for yourself and others that I think like really defines um, is a part, I think, of like being good at role playing. Right? It is certainly, it's just definitely not the only thing, but it is like a very big part of that. Is being able to know this, and I think a lot of people in this community kind of like know that deep down, because I do see a lot of steering taking place quite often. It's just the word metagaming, like for years, was kind of like dragged through the mud, and like it was really hard to kind of talk about this. But I think in hindsight, it's really all just really silly, and it's really important to recognize that meta knowledge, kind of the knowledge of things that you take from outside the game into the game, is a very important part of having situational awareness within a roleplay.
I gotta imagine like the sort of relief that you felt when you had been like searching for this thing for like ever, hoping that your character will come across it, and you like being behind the wheel. Uh,
I mean, it was even more than that. It's not just hoping that I would come across it, right? It was being aware that it was impossible for me to find because this wasn't like an object on the map or anything, right? Like I knew it wasn't an object on the map. So I was just like, how am I supposed to find this, right? That was the question in my mind. It was like, how am I
oh,
supposed to find this thing that I know is not there? I know it's not there. I know it's invisible, but like, um, so it was even more of a relief, right? Because I knew I wasn't going to find it naturally.
yeah. And like you said, like, sorry, I'm like jumping topics here, but you also said like a lot of people do this already, right? Like steering is so common already that like people don't recognize it for what it is, but it is like one of the most prevalent things I think a lot of people try to do is whenever people are aware of other characters and like things that those other characters are all about, like maybe very specific traits or things that the players are going for with them, that they will like try to play into them somehow. A good friend of mine, Jay Fizzy, this is way back in like season one of Fracture Thrones. So she came in as this sort of very promiscuous wife of one of the members of the guard. I forget who it was, but she effectively came in with this understanding that she was just gonna be this like really flirty uh, mistress, just kind of like just kind of messing around with all of the male characters. And at some point, I was talking to her about this. She recognized that like one of the characters very specifically has a kind of a very emotional weakness to women. Uh, he's very easily flustered and manipulated by women, and so she played into that a lot. She when she saw him, she was like, I can, make I can play into that. I can make this like experience worth it. And it's like, sure, you're looking at that situation and you're saying, oh well, that character uh, is not benefiting from that situation. But the player, in an ideal situation, this is not how it played out, but the player kind of on the receiving end of that, who has put that on their sheet, knowing that that's something that they're aiming for, uh, ideally would see that as like a huge win because that's like, oh, this is exactly what I was looking for, right? Like this, my character is very easily manipulated by women, and this character who is playing a woman that can do that is playing into that. That's great. This is exactly what I was aiming for. This is awesome. We're good. Thumbs up. Characters not having a great time. They're probably gonna, I don't know, end up in a shitty situation somehow. Whatever. But the outcome for the player should generally be good in that sort of situation. And she it's not like it's definitely not the terminology that we use back then, especially like even nowadays. It's still something that I think people in VR are very much picking up and starting to understand. But the practice is definitely there. right? She even back then was very uh, aware, like situationally aware, that that was one thing that she wanted to do in that circumstance was to like heighten this experience and to play into what she knew about the characters, which is very much again using knowledge about the characters that she understood from a meta perspective in session to steer a situation and to play to lift it, which is like exactly what we want to do here, right?
Yep.
So like, I mean, thinking about meta knowledge, right? I struggle with the term metagaming because I actually kind of want to maintain the term in like the connotation it has for the sake of like keeping it in its box. So I usually think, metagaming means you are gaming with meta knowledge, which means you are trying to win with it. Uh, so that's what I think whenever I see that.
Yeah, that is how that is how it's used, right? Where like
Yeah.
in the sense, and this is like a weird this is like a weird thing that happens sometimes with like language, where like, or especially in like communities, where like you take an idea and then you essentially like redefine that idea to be explicitly negative or explicitly positive, right? Where like in this context, like metagaming was essentially defined as negative metagaming. To end up with this like recursive definition where like the definition doesn't actually match what's going on, or the way people use it doesn't actually match the definition that they give. And it's mostly the connotation that's being used, right? It's being used with an exclusively negative connotation, even though the definition itself is not. And I suppose this is a bit beyond playing to lift, but as with myself, this works if everybody has like an understanding, everybody has like a cultural understanding of what's going on. But like if you tell people don't use meta knowledge, right? Don't use out of game knowledge in game, right? If that's what you tell people, then the people who don't have the cultural context to understand that you're only talking about cases where you're trying to play to win, um, won't be able to pick that up, you know? So this is, I suppose, a bit more of like a linguistic argument here than anything, right? It's for the clarity.
Yeah. So I know this is a topic that you may definitely want to talk about, but very related, right? Character sheets and whether or not they're visible, right? This just came to mind thinking about like how
Oh
you
yeah.
understand like what you know about other characters and how you can like play into that, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think this would be. I think we've already touched on this, but you know what? Let's touch on it again. Why not?
Sure.
Playing to lift honestly can start like even before a role play like even starts. Like you can start playing to lift even before that happens. And the way that you can do that is by essentially making characters that are going to like work well with each other, be able to play off each other well. This is something that does happen in the community. Usually, the way that it happens is you have like two or like a couple of friends kind of get together and like, hey, let's make like matching characters or like characters that theme off of each other well, and you kind of like talk to each other in private, and then you submit character sheets like together to a role play. This is quite common. Got a lot of these during Worlds Apart. Actually, we got quite a few of them. Um, what is vanishingly rare, though, like so incredibly rare, is the ability for someone to join a role play like without privately communicating with somebody beforehand and being able to like create this character with other people, right? Create a character that is going to work well with others, because a lot of role plays, and I would say the vast majority of them hide hide character sheets from participants. Character sheets, when you submit the character sheets, the channel is only available for submissions. You can't see the history of the channel. It is hidden from everyone because the characters are meant to be a secret, because metagaming, right? Because if they weren't secret, I suppose I don't actually know. This is probably going to be a bit of a straw man, but if they weren't secret, you might like have people like trying to exploit the character's secrets or something. I'm not really sure. What I would love to see, right? I would love to see exactly the opposite. I would love to see roleplay or roleplays plural that have just fully public character creation, because I want to talk with other people. I want to make my character in a way that it's going to theme well with others. Not necessarily like get along with others, right? That doesn't necessarily need to be the case. Just like give others, have a character that is able to bounce off of others in a way that's fun for them and in a way that's fun for me. And that definitely cannot be done in an environment where character sheets and character creation is hidden and a secret. I think that's something that I would really want to see out of role plays. There's no reason that we can't start playing to lift even before the role play begins.
Yeah, I do think a lot of that apprehension toward like even having open character sheets. And I feel like this is definitely a more recent thing. I think over time this sort of like anti-spoiler culture has kind of seeped into the character sheet submission a little bit. This definitely wasn't always the case. There used to be a lot more open submission channels, at least in my experience. But I think anti-spoiler culture has definitely evolved a little bit. It's definitely been around a very long time, but at some point it started to enter other subjects where even the next character that someone's going to play, they're not even willing to share it, or even like any images or any details about it because it's a secret. They're gonna have to wait until they actually go into session because it's a secret. And we're gonna talk about secrets at some other point, but my God, does it very heavily tie into this, right? It is the sort of basis on like why a lot of players kind of seek out this sort of hidden pipeline is because, well, I don't want to reveal anything about my character until they experience it in the session. And it really does kind of stifle the creative process. If you are playing to lift, if you are playing for a shared theme, then it's hard to collaboratively hit that sort of shared theme if you're creating in a vacuum. And that's kind of the major detriment that you have when you are hiding that information between players, is that the shared theme suffers, especially if you already have one that you're going for. Then again, creating things in a vacuum means that they will tend to work together far worse than if they were created with each other in mind.
Like, I think I personally think that this is kind of like the origin of the very common advice to enter a role play like with a friend that you can trust. Like, I feel like this is one of the main reasons. Because like if you enter into a role play with a friend, then you can like do all of these things that is not baked into the design, but like you can just do it anyway. You can kind of like share, you can collaborate, you can essentially play to lift each other, which the design of many role plays actually discourages, unfortunately. And entering into a role play with a friend is a way to circumvent that, right? Explicitly. I don't know. That's just I suppose a theory on my part. I'll definitely have lots to say about secrets and the lack thereof. In the meantime, I suppose I'll kind of leave it with like a short a short quip here, I guess. Like consider that unless you're literally like entirely 100% scripting your role play, where you're like not even doing a role play anymore, you're doing a play. Like unless you're doing that, there are no such things as spoilers because you don't know what's going to happen because it's not scripted, right? Like you have no idea what's going to happen, and therefore they're literally like it's just not a spoiler.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the fun things about roleplay is that it is almost entirely purely based on improv. Check out that segue.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow.
I did it.
Is it time? Is it time for me to like get out the glasses and like
Yeah.
spend like an inordinate amount of time talking about improv?
So I'll as you get the glasses, I'll explain a
Okay.
little bit.
Okay.
All right. So
Yeah.
Dylan here, along with Abiz, runs an improv workshop, an improv roleplay workshop called the Tool Shed, which runs on Thursdays, and has just completed a series of workshops talking about, I believe, mostly emotions and how to portray them. I'm probably selling it very short there, but the idea behind this workshop is to kind of integrate these sort of like very fundamental improv principles with roleplay and determine like uh, how to make scenes better and to apply those into these very long form campaign style things that we tend to do. So I think Sellen's glasses are now on. So
Yep.
feel free.
And I will have to issue a correction, Solace, because
All good.
Toolshed, I will enforce Toolshed's status as a roleplay workshop and not an improv workshop. Like
Okay.
I know we've been doing mostly improv, but let me tell you, I have an interactive theater textbook in front of me right now, and
Yeah.
that's I suppose. Sneak peek as to what's coming in the future. So like yeah, we do role play and kind of like role play related things, and I suppose role play related things. Improv is a big one, and this is near and dear to my heart. And improv kind of informs a lot of how I personally think about role play. Because what improv really is, like the core of improv, what that really is a sort of like systematization of how to work together and collaborate to make a funny and entertaining scene. Actually, it doesn't even necessarily have to be funny. Make an entertaining scene, right? I'll like strike funny from there because there's lots of improv that's not specifically intended to be funny, even though humor does tend to be a big motif. Yeah, so even as I say that, right, like a sort of like system to collaborate to make an entertaining scene, right? Like you replace a couple of words and you get like playing to lift, because that's really what it is, right? That's really truly what improv is you are essentially playing to lift everybody in an improv scene. That's how it works. And I guess I firmly have my glasses attached, and I would like to take some time to like talk about improv and some practical examples of playing to lift, because we've been talking about playing to lift in a sort of like, hey, you should do this. And what I want to do is kind of give y'all an idea of like well, how do you actually play to lift, right? It's easy for us to kind of just sit here and tell you that you should do it, but how do you actually do it, right? Like, what do you actually do? So yeah, let's get started. Why don't we? I'll probably have some like as examples, and we'll do our best. Though I might add, if you've never been to an improv workshop or like any structured improv environment, and you're doing some role play, I highly, highly, highly recommend. Right, even if you feel like you're a really good improviser, I still highly, highly recommend it, because I suppose there's no replacement for practice, dedicated practice.
I can absolutely confirm. I came in feeling I was very confident on improv principles and still learned quite a bit.
All right. So I have, as I mentioned, a textbook in front of me. And this is, I guess, chapter 10, ensemble improvisation. The first section in this chapter is entitled Trust. That's the first section in this chapter, because what improv is all about, really, is kind of building trust between the people in the scene, right? You want to be able to trust each other, trust your scene partner, trust everyone around you to benefit the scene. Because if there is no trust, then you can't have play. So this is sort of the first step in playing to lift. Before you even get to the role play, before you even get to any of that, we rewind a few steps to last episode. Safety enables intensity, and we look at the quote. Trust is not implied; it is cultivated. That is the first step to improvisation: is to cultivate trust with each other. This is why you will often see a lot of like improv games resemble icebreakers. If for anybody who's like seen improv or like done that sort of thing, there are a lot of improv games that are just basically icebreakers, because that's the point, right? That's literally the point, is to get yourself into a state of being where you're comfortable with those people around you, and so you're able to play with each other. That's step number 1. All right. Now that we have that like baseline established, let's say you're in a role play, you're in a scene, and you encounter another character, and you don't really know what they're about, right? Let's say you've never met this character before, and you're in a role play that has secret character creation, so you don't actually know who they are. How do you, as a player, lift this scene? How do you kind of like get yourself to a point where you can enhance the scene for yourself and the other person? This is where we kind of get to the first phase of improv, which is called building the base reality. What building the base reality essentially is you and all your scene partners, whoever just happens to be in your immediate vicinity, you and all your scene partners working together to get on the same wavelength. In a short form improv sort of an environment, actors or performers usually start from scratch. They usually start from like a single word or like a single suggestion and build a world out of nothing, right? And so that's why it's called building the base reality, because you might you're essentially building a world out of just a single suggestion. In roleplay, we have a lot of this work done for us, right? Like lots of roleplays have like mountains of lore. You have your character sheet, so you know what character you're playing ahead of time. You have rules. You have all sorts of systems in place to help you be on the same page as the other people in the roleplay. But that doesn't mean that when you are entering into a scene, you don't have to build your base reality. Let me give an example. Let's say you're in a role play, and like somebody like another character like frantically runs in the room and is like yelling like, oh my goodness, drop everything right now, there is an emergency, we have to go, right? You have no idea what's going on. You have absolutely no idea what's going on in character. Okay, the other person established there is an emergency, but you have no idea what's going on. You are not on the same wavelength as this other person. In order to be on the same wavelength, you're essentially going to have to you're essentially going to have to ask questions about like what's going on, and the other person or the other people in the scene are going to have to tell you what is going on in other places in the role play. This is like a big difference between role play and other forms of sort of non-immersive theater, are that role play does not take place on a stage. You can have multiple groups of people having multiple different scenes at the same time. And therefore, while people are in different scenes at the same time, they're effectively occupying different realities. So when those different realities collide, you'll have to get back on the same wavelength. You'll have to build your base reality, not from scratch, but you'll have to build your base reality to get on the same wavelength as the other players who have thus far been in a different scene.
Casually just mentioned number 10.
Yeah, casually. It's all related. It's all related. Yes. All right. Building the base reality, essentially getting on the same wavelength. And here is where I'm going to talk about a very, very important thing, and that is the term yes and. Yes and is a very important skill in improv. It is also probably the most misused term, I think, in the roleplay community when referring to improv. People rightfully say, right? People very rightfully say that yes and is a very important tool when you're improvising in a scene. But it is almost like over glorified as like a principle that you should always adhere to, rather than a tool that is used in specific circumstances. Yes and is a tool specifically for building the base reality. And here's how it works. So the yes part in yes and refers to if I make a statement in character, the yes part means that you should take that statement and accept it. Now, I use the word accept very specifically rather than like agree, for example, because you don't have to agree with that statement, right? Like if I say, hey, you should come with me, you don't actually need to come with me, right? You don't need to agree that you should be able to come with me. What you need to do when you're establishing the base reality, though, what you need to do when you're getting on the same wavelength as the other person is to accept what they are doing. You need to kind of look at them and be like, yes, that happened. If another character kind of like I'll give an example. I suppose we can go back to the example TM here, right? If you have your Lord character who's trying to be like super intimidating and they're trying to establish themselves as this like threat, if they go and give their villainous monologue to a group, and then everybody is standing around and it's like, yeah, whatever, then what they have done hasn't been accepted, and you kind of end up with two different realities going on at the same time. You're not on the same wavelength. You can't play together if you're not on the same wavelength. So that's the first step of yes-anding, is to accept what the other person has done with. Not necessarily agree, but just accept and react to what they are doing. All right, that's the yes part. What about the and? The and of yes and means to add information, and specifically add information in a way that you extend what the other player is doing. If if let's go back to the emergency example. If a character comes up and says, it's an emergency, like eggs are falling from the sky, that's pretty ridiculous. That's a pretty ridiculous thing. Not to say that, ridiculous things don't sometimes happen in roleplay. That's pretty ridiculous, right? One of the worst things that you can possibly do in the context of like getting on the same wavelength as a different player is to not add more information to the scene. Adding information to the scene means that instead of relying on the other people in the scene to tell you kind of like what's going on, to be the people in the driver's seat, adding means that you take responsibility on yourself to drive the scene forward, to add more information. This what this looks like in an improv scene usually is one character might say, oh my goodness, there are eggs raining from the sky. Then the next character might say, gosh, why did Walmart do another sale again? Gosh, I'm being put on the spot. It's really hard, right? And see, this is the example, right? I'm serving here as an example. It's really hard to come up with stuff off the top of your head by yourself. It's really hard. It is so much easier to be on the same wavelength with another person in a scene when you can go back and forth between two people, right? Adding is essentially helping your scene partners communicate with you by taking the burden off of them being the only person to do anything in the scene, right?
So
it turns
sorry.
a monologue into a conversation.
So I'll go ahead and I'll yes and it, right? The sky chickens are at it again.
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, let's do this. All right, Solus. Oh my goodness, Solus, there are eggs raining from the sky. What do we do?
Oh, well, how long has it been since Farmer Joe wrangled the sky chickens?
It's been 3 months. It's been 3 months, and the yolks are on the ground, and they've just been rotting, and it's just, gosh.
All right, you go clean them up. I'll get him back from his adventure. He went to the ice bear caves. I don't fucking know.
Okay, this is kind of falling apart.
Yeah,
but anyway, the point is, this is kind of falling apart. It's
we're experts.
We're expert. Warming up is also really important, by the way, and as you can see. But the point being, right, that I feel like neither of us were like grasping at straws there, right? You essentially wait for the other person, you pay attention to them, and then you add information to the scene. So it's not just a one-person show, it's not just a monologue, it's a very collaborative process. And finally, very importantly, when yes-anding, the information that you add to the scene should extend what the other person is doing. If you here's an example, right? It's like if a character comes in and is like, "Hi mom, I'm home," and the mom is like, "Yes, hi son, I see that you're home. That airplane is blue." That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? You've added information to the scene, but it doesn't really make sense in context of the scene. So yeah, yes and means 3 things, right? Acknowledge the other person, add information to the scene, make sure that information is relevant to what your scene partners were doing previously. And if you do that, right, if you yes and for a little bit, if you kind of go back and forth, bounce back and forth while following the principles of yes and, then you will very quickly get on the same page as the other person. That is what yes anding is.
So
All right, I've been. Yep.
I want to say a better example would be, "Hey son, how many eggs have you caught today?"
I've got 12 dozen.
It's
Got
coming
12 dozen
back.
eggs. Just have my protein, you know? I'm
Sky
gonna.
chickens are just giving us free protein. I mean, gotta take it.
I've been working out. I've been working on. I'm gonna ace my test here. I'm gonna ace my fitness test and be the best personal trainer that you could hope for.
And that's why we're at the gym.
Yep, exactly. It's all a ploy for big egg.
Big egg.
Yeah.
This this podcast has been sponsored to you by Big Egg. Oh
Dear.
god. Okay, so I wanna kind of zoom back a little bit, right? Because like
Mhm.
this is sort of, it was an example that sort of fell apart, but the interesting bit of it is assessing the reality of the scene, right? Because we did
Mhm.
establish quite a few things there, right? So looking back at the sky chicken thing, right? We've established A, that there are eggs raining from the sky. B, that that is unusual, which is expected, but it is important in the context of a setting that is not like ours, right? We have established that it is not like ours, but it's still weird that this is happening, which Selwyn can talk very much about Crazy Town and what that means. I can talk about it as well. It basically, at a very base level, just
Mhm.
means that reality has gotten out of control, right? The moment that how you react to things determines what becomes real in that situation, what becomes normal, what becomes evident, right? So we establish that there are eggs raining from the sky, which is what was said. We have implied reality that this is abnormal because of how we reacted to it. And then we said something about sky chickens. We said something about a farmer. We have established that sky chickens are domesticated and bred, and there's someone looking after them that is not there. Right? There are so many things that we've basically entered into reality without actually just outright saying it,
Mhm.
which is which is a lot of like, this is what reality building really does, is that we are making the scene more robust by saying, these are the things that are normal to talk about that we can imply within the setting, that we can kind of just grab from the context of the scene and the setting and everything that we've done so far, and we could just infer things about this setting that help us understand it as role players. And that kind of brings us closer to the sort of shared understanding that we need to be able to perform together as role players.
Yeah, like imagine if I had like introduced this like hey yo man, you see those eggs raining from the sky? Yeah, they're like pretty cool. Like that would have been a very different scene. Uh
Yeah. Oh yeah.
but yeah, I think I might have made a mistake with the example and like started off with something like too terribly absurd, right? I guess um short form improv, which I guess is what I'm used to a little bit, tends to lean into the absurd quite a bit. But like it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to lean into the absurd. And I guess in this textbook that I have in front of me, it has the much more measured example of "Hi mom, I'm home," right? Being like the first sentence here. This establishes a lot of things, right? This sentence establishes um like three different things, right? It establishes myself, the relationship to the other character who's my mother, and the fact that I'm like coming home, right? Probably through a door, you know. That sentence carries like so much information with it. That
Hmm.
it's a very good first sentence of an improv scene, and probably far better actually than I would say the oh my goodness, there are eggs raining from the sky, because eggs raining from the sky does establish one thing, but it doesn't tell me anything about like who we are or what we're doing. It doesn't really give us anything about like the relationships between the characters in the scene. Um, So actually, that but yeah, I mean, there are no mistakes in improv. It's just like there are some rules, air quotes, rules in the sense of like, if you do these things, you'll probably have a good scene, but they're not like you have to do these things, and it's also like you'll just see improvisers doing them often because they work, basically.
Mm-hmm. Like
Um,
Reeling in Crazy Town, for example. That one, we watched. I forget what group it was, but we watched a professional improv group
mhm,
bring someone onto the stage to enter things into reality to kind of like create these sort of prompts for them to work off of. And like the way that they responded to some of these things was very interesting because at times they would kind of build off of it directly. They would kind of enter it into the scene and just make it real and work with it. And sometimes they would like circle back on it and kind of question why it's there and the absurdity of it. And that would kind of
mhm,
reinforce that this is weird because the reality of the scene does not normally allow this, and that just immediately avoids this sort of issue that happens with Crazy Town, where you enter something in that is probably absurd enough to break all the continuity of your setting, but then don't actually make light of that. Right? That's
mhm.
when Crazy Town really happens.
I can actually define Crazy Town because now I suppose we went from just like mentioning it to like actually talking about it. Now I can actually
Mm-hmm.
define Crazy Town for our viewers who may not know what it is.
Yeah.
Crazy Town is a concept that springs up from some schools of improv. I know it from the UCB Upright Citizens Brigade. Um, it's a thing that can happen if you skip the accepting part of yes anding. And here's an example. Um, I have been, I guess, I've participated in narrative improv, and something that we were trying to do in this particular narrative improv troupe was we would essentially tell a story, um, half an hour to an hour long, unscripted play from scratch. We would just get up on stage and go. And like one of the big themes that we would play around is with character death, right? We would actually have a character die in every single story. Um, this troop still exists. It's called Our Passing Tale. I probably shot them out at the end, but anyway. Um,
Mm.
so at the end of one of our performances, what ended up happening is like we get to the big climactic scene. The character who is supposed to die dies. Um, and like the police arrives, and the police like wants to arrest the perpetrator, but like the perpetrator doesn't want to go, and there's this like big argument, and there's like also like there was a sort of like Frankenstein's monster sort of thing going on, and the monster is like is like causing trouble. And we like watched ourselves back because this was recorded. We like watched ourselves back at like at the end of this performance, and we realized that there's a dead body on the ground, and for like 10 minutes there was just an argument about like whether or not like this perpetrator character should be arrested. And there's like a dead body on the ground, and then like one of these characters was supposed to be their like significant other, and they're just kind of like having this like silly argument over who gets to arrest the perpetrator, right? And that's Crazy Town, because this character just died and everybody just forgot about it. Nobody was acknowledging that there was this character on the ground dead. And that gives a really uncomfortable feeling to the scene. Crazy Town is what happens when you don't accept the things that your scene partners are doing. When you act like the things that they're doing, especially the things that are, a bit out of the ordinary, are normal, right? You act like it's normal. You forget that it's there. a character dying is not normal, but if you forget that it's there, it kind of feels like the characters think that it is normal. And that's a really weird feeling. And that's what it means to be in Crazy Town. It's like I'm surrounded by all these crazy people. They're just okay with all these things that are going on. I think this is something that does occasionally come up in roleplay, where like characters can kind of tunnel vision and get swept up in the moment, like with a scene, and you kind of forget about the big picture, and you forget about you're so focused on like reacting to one specific thing, you forget about all the other things, and you don't accept and you don't acknowledge the scene as a whole, and a scene can then very easily descend into Crazy Town.
Mm-hmm. My mind wanders to a couple examples. One being from one of the Toolshed workshops, with I think it was Unknown Entity and who else was in the scene? I want to say it was Flying Angel,
Mhm.
where they were a duo in a car and they ran over someone, and then it became like there goes Chelsea, and then they continue the scene, and then it's like, well, Crazy Town just happened, right? Uh, Flying Angel says, yes. So I believe I am right here. So it really was like that was the entrance to Crazy Town of like they have committed vehicular manslaughter, uh, but that didn't matter in the scene. That just became a normal thing that happened, and then they moved on, right?
To be perfectly clear, this is not to say that you can't have a crazy character, right? Like if you have the one crazy character and everybody else is like protesting, like what the heck, you're crazy, right? Then it's not Crazy Town, right? Um, then you have like your one crazy character that's kind of being played up for comedic effect, but everybody else is there establishing the reality of the scene, right? The reality is that this character is crazy. And that can be in certain situations be played up for comedic effect, right? Um, I would advise to do so carefully. Like, it's very easy to kind of like stomp on somebody else by like treating them as crazy. So that's kind of like maybe a bit advanced, but it can be done. Crazy Town once again is when kind of like everybody in the scene normalizes it because nobody's really it's like a collective thing that happens. Nobody's pushing back against the craziness.
Yeah.
Nobody's acknowledging, like you're neither you're just not acknowledging it. You're neither being like, oh, this is strange, nor are you being like, oh, this is normal, leaving everybody in the scene to wonder like what's going on. And it's kind of this weird like liminal feeling of like you don't know if it's weird or not, or if it's supposed to be weird or not.
So to expand a little bit, this is actually one of the more major issues that I find with a lot of role plays that has been around for years and years. Uh, I'm gonna tie this back in because we've talked mostly about it in an improv sense, but in the sense of like determining what the reality of a setting is, it really is kind of everyone's job to support that, right? And everything that you do within a scene kind of reinforces it. This especially becomes a risk when you have characters that are acting apart from the norm, apart from what is normal. You always need something to remind within the scene that the thing, if someone is an exception, that they are an exception, right? There needs to be the normal to make the exception exceptional. Uh, like is this like if you've got a setting that's once again I'm going back to the medieval here, right? If you've got a setting where someone has status and you have a lot of players that want to defy the status, but you don't have anyone recognizing that the status exists to begin with, then the reality is that that status isn't actually there because no one has accepted it yet. And that means you're not really defying anything, first of all, but second of all, you haven't really established what the reality of the setting is.
Mhm.
Even though And again, especially with roleplay, we have a lot of these things that are pre-established before we even get into the world. These are things that might already exist, but you can't take those for granted because you have to enter those into the scene somehow, because the reality that we experience as role players is exactly what we perceive and nothing more. And that is, what was it, number 10? I think we talked about it before. We mentioned that it came up. Yeah, number 10. Reality is subjective. Just casually popping that one back in there again. It's so crucial to understand that when to kind of rope this back into Crazy Town, like Crazy Town is when you don't accept the thing is absurd. It is so important to frame that the abnormal thing is abnormal, to recognize it for what it is and to react to it for what it is, because that's how you build the reality of a setting. As I've been in many different role plays, and I have seen this across all of them to some degree, that there is some form of I want to be the thing that stands out, but I have not established yet that I am the thing that stands out, because there's not enough of a basis here to show that, because there's not enough to stand out from. That's like super important. That's actually, I think, a big reason why I have started to tend toward playing characters that are just straight up examples of the setting to some degree. Like I've gone on record kind of, I'm quoting myself at this point to say that I play characters that are products of their environment, and that has been pretty much for the most part how I build characters. I take the environment and I think about what makes them the way they are and how they think and see the world, and then I build off of that. Which is to say, I build based off of what I read to be the reality of the setting. So when I enter scenes where the reality is not being accepted, that for me is when the experience starts to fall apart a bit, because then you really do get that sort of Crazy Town. It's definitely not necessarily in the high absurdity of something like falling eggs, but it is definitely there in the sense that you have created a new norm without realizing it in a setting that already has a norm, that is already a perceived and understood and shared understanding of what is normal within a world.
Yeah, I guess, if everyone's special, then no one is. But
Yes.
I guess
Syndrome.
before we tangent, yeah, syndromal. Before we tangent again, I actually would like to finish the example, because I suppose I started on yes and saying that it is like one of the most abused phrases in
Yeah.
improv, and I think it does get abused in the roleplay community a bit as like this all important tenet of improv that you should always do. And I'm here to tell you that you shouldn't always do it, because yes and is a specific technique that is used for building the base reality. It's actually not even the only technique. It is just a specific technique that's used for building the base reality. But that's only phase one of a scene. That's only like the introductions, that's only getting on the same page as the other person. Once you get on the same page as the other person, and you've like established all this information, well, there's not really a point to like establishing more information, because you're already on the same page, you already know what's going on. And if all you're going to do is yes and the other person, then nothing's ever going to happen, because you're just talking about things that have already happened, essentially. So that's where a lot of the other techniques come in. Now it depends on like which school of improv you follow, kind of like what step comes next. There are like many different ways to look at it, but essentially, um, oh sorry, essentially what the way that UCB would put it is the next phase of an improv scene is finding the game, figuring out, okay, now we're on the same page. What do we do with that? Finding the game of the scene. In UCB, this is often, the comedic game of the scene. Obviously, in role play and even in improv, it doesn't necessarily have to be comedic. But essentially, once you're on the same page as the other person, you have to ask the question, well, what do we do with this now? And there are many different techniques, many, many, many different techniques to get there. Improv has, improv is surprisingly a lot less about coming up with stuff from the top of your head. Actually, here you go. Solus, can you do me a favor?
Sure.
Can you give me a fact, like the most boring and mundane fact you can think of?
Wood is made from trees.
So you're telling me that the kitchen countertop that I built for you is not good enough? You're telling me that you're telling me that I should have gotten the granite, right? You just want the granite countertop.
Well, you haven't even been listening, because I've always wanted quartz.
Ah, of course. And where do you think this money is going to come from for this quartz countertop? From the trees?
Not my pockets. I already pay for everything.
All right. Anyway, a quick example right there. This is that right there was an example of a technique that I have, borrowed. I would say stolen from a wonderful person called Mastance, who is a excellent improv coach called Jack Lears. This is one example of many, many, many different techniques that kind of you can learn in an improv environment. Jack Lears is essentially has this key phrase built into it. So you're telling me that the idea is that you're listening to what your scene partner is saying, and you can take a statement that they made and read between the lines. Read between the lines, assign a motivation to that. Usually kind of negative and like a conflicting motivation. This can be excellent in a sort of scene where two characters are kind of have a tension between them. And Jack Lears can kind of be used to kind of incite that conflict, kind of make it bubble over. You can essentially use this technique to like begin an argument, basically. Which is great because that's what we're going to be talking about next week, I believe. Embracing conflict and all the benefits, of that. I won't get too far into that, but like, that was just like one example of like a game you can play. Is, well, what if I want to, I'm these two characters have a lot of tension between them. They have the potential for conflict, but neither of them is really like super confrontational. Jack Lears is something that can be used to kind of make that conflict boil over. And this is just one example amongst the many that you can use to find a game to play in a scene with your partner. Of course, which one you're going to pick, right? Which technique you're going to pick is going to highly depend on the circumstances and that situational awareness that we were talking about. Right? There are lots of directions to take things. Very importantly, at this point in the scene, you're no longer yes-anding, right? You're no longer necessarily agreeing and adding more information, right? That phase is over. Now you're playing the game, and instead of adding more information to the scene, you're now doing the thing that you got onto the same page with your partners with. You're now playing the bit, so to speak, in I guess the language that might be more common in some of the VR role plays that I'm in.
Mhm. Yeah, we definitely like in that bit too. We did a couple back and forths, right? It was different bits of information, but again, like even though we aren't like necessarily building the base reality, we are still like introducing things, right? Like it wasn't necessarily clear or explained that Silent's character here was either forgetful.
Well, okay, so
right?
so we have to build the base reality because we're starting from scratch. We're starting from nothing. Theoretically, you know, this would have been done in the context of a larger scene where we already had like an awkward silence going.
Sure.
That's when like one of the like very good places to use jackal-ears.
Yeah. When things stagnate.
Obviously, yeah, obviously starting from nothing, we have to get onto the same page. So we were doing some yes anding there, but it would be very hard for us to give an example where we're not doing that because we would have to go on for a bit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I guess what I mean to say is like entering things into reality can happen at any point. Yes, anding is like specifically built for that. But I guess like I can say something and enter it in, and then that's just real.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. It's once again, it's not so much about like the truth of the matter. When we say make it real, right? It's not so much about it being true. It's about it being felt. Like, yes, this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the other character did this thing, and that makes it real. It makes it felt. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, like I could go on probably for a really long time. Unfortunately, it's like it's hard to just talk about improv because so much of it is literally just playing. Like that's really what improv is just, you know, you get in a group and you just play together, right? It's the play in the role play part, right? And so yeah, highly recommend if you're a role player and you're like, you know, you've never tried out improv, highly recommend. It will make you sort of better at playing to lift. It just full stop. Improv will make you better at playing to lift because improv is playing to lift. It is not about coming up with things off the top of your head. It is not about trying to be funny. In fact, trying to be funny will hurt the improv scene. This is a thing that we call gagging. Gagging is when one person essentially tries to make a joke in an improv scene. And of course, you know, improv is a bit different than role play because you do often have an audience, but the audience will feel it. Your scene partner will feel it. It's very easy to tell that the joke is dishonest. It's dishonest because you're forcing the joke in, you're forcing the spotlight on yourself, and it doesn't have the same fun feeling as when things happen through cooperation. Yeah, so that's yeah, if you've ever worried about like, you know, not being spontaneous or not being creative or not being any of these things enough to do improv, I promise improv is about none of those things. It is in fact like often detrimental to do it can even be detrimental to like try to come up with funny stuff off the top of your head. That actually hurts an improv scene explicitly. So, in the same way that, you know, playing to win, right? Playing to win, trying to put the spotlight on yourself constantly can explicitly hurt a role play scene. It's the same thing, literally.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Things are more fun when you collaborate with the other players because we did talk about audience a little bit there. The audience of a role play, uh, whether or not you're streaming the performance, because that's a different thing altogether. The audience is your other players of your performance. That is who your audience is in a role play. The audience is your fellow players. So that's a interesting recontextualization to keep in mind of like how exactly you're performing and what the goal is of your performance as a player. Uh, we've kind of reached the end of our planned topics here, but I wanted to bring another one here, mostly because of a discussion I had, or not even that I had, that I saw in the most recent NICAP episode. We're talking about combat, and at some point I made the case of like, uh, they were talking about like the one of the coolest experiences they had. I forget who it was. I think it was Coyote. I was talking about like the kind of fun that they had as a combat partner with this other player, that they tried something that he didn't he expected it to fail. He kind of whiffed a couple of hits expecting it to just be like part of the rhythm that he was getting into, and then his combat partner basically took and reacted to all of it, and it was very impressive and cool, and it felt great. uh, and I had the realization that, you know, roping combat back into this discussion as well, that like what makes combat so fulfilling is when the other player reacts in some way. Because we a lot of us have been in these like endless amount of combat workshops, and the point always comes up that you portray weight, that you react to people's movements and actions, and that you defend and attack, and you kind of do the back and forth and everything. But it never gets talked about enough that like reaction is the bread and butter. Like the best way that you can heighten a scenario within combat is by making the thing that the other person does look cool, and you can look cool while doing it too, right? If you're able to do footwork and you can just like stance up, kind of take the weight of whatever the other person's doing and then dish it back, like that looks so much better from a third party perspective. That looks so much better for the person you are playing with. That feels so much better for you because you're actually doing more things and making it more of a interactive experience. Like overall, it's just better for everyone, right? The counter example is when you don't react, right? And this, we can link this back to talking about Crazy Town if we want to, because it really does kind of fit that exact same sort of vibe in that.
Oh no, is this going to be the next yes and?
This, yes, we're
Don't
bringing
do
it
it,
back.
Solus.
We're bringing it
Don't
back.
do it. There are so many other things. We don't need to focus singularly on. Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead.
The only reason I'm bringing it up is because it, yes, and Crazy Town, Flying Angel says, it just becomes this sort of issue of when you do things that are not accepted by not being reacted to, then they feel less real. I guess it's not really Crazy Town in that sense. It's the exact opposite. It's the thing that doesn't feel real, right? You take you do your swing, whatever you're doing your melee combat, right? You do your swing, and the other person stands still and then returns fire, right? Like that feels awful, right? Because the person didn't really react to what you're doing. Granted, latency of VR chat is very high, and it's very hard to get this sort of rhythm down, which is why there's a sort of science to it. There's a sort of rhythm and dance to combat. But when it comes down to it, like what really becomes the bread and butter of these sort of scenarios is reaction. It is absolutely seeing the thing that happens, accepting that it happened, reacting to it. and then it becomes real. And that is in and of itself a form of playing to lift, because you are lifting the thing that happened. You are lifting the scenario that just happened, or that is currently happening, by reacting to it and making it more interesting, more heightened. And that's just that the bread and butter is reaction. That is it. Like, I cannot stress enough that I feel like every single combat workshop should almost explicitly just talk about reaction. Like, that is it. Don't worry about, like, having to set up lines or like knowing formations or whatever. Just react. That is it. Think about ways to react, thinking about how to react, think about what kind of tools you have to react. Just react to things, make them real. Right. That's my soapbox aside.
Absolutely. I don't know. Can I like end this like portion on improv with like a I once again I've mentioned this book that I have in front of me, and the reason I have it in front of me is because I wanted to read like a paragraph from it.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I actually got this book like within the last week. I suppose it would have been more thematic to last week with the whole thing with trust, but like honestly, I think like trust, or rather lack of it, is usually the biggest obstacle in like to playing to lift, right? Like, I know at the beginning we talked about like the worst case scenario, you're just in a better scene now, right? But I can emphasize that I can empathize that it doesn't always feel like that, right? Like playing to lift, kind of like helping others out. Role playing in general like is a sort of vulnerable state, right? You're putting yourself in this vulnerable state. It's a social contract, and so like trust kind of prevents, or lack of trust prevents, a lot of things from happening. And so I just like to like read this quote from this this improv book here. Anyway, we are conditioned almost from birth to mistrust one another. I'll often ask a new ensemble to define mistrust for me. They will usually say, not trusting someone. I will refuse that answer and ask them to define what not trusting someone is. They will usually have trouble with it until I say the word fear. Mistrust is fear, and fear is our natural reaction to the unknown. Open a door to a dark room and you experience fear. Fear of the dark, fear that someone is there to harm you, or perhaps fear of tripping over a piece of furniture that you cannot see. Turn on the light, however, and the same room may become a warm and comfortable place. When we don't know how a person will react, what he or she will say or do, we pull back. But when we get to know how another thinks, feels, and reacts to a variety of things, the door is open for a trusting relationship with that individual. Giving trust always represents risk. Perhaps this is why it is so difficult to come by. What we risk when we trust people is betrayal. The fear of betrayal, not betrayal itself, is chiefly what prevents us from trusting one another. I do not trust you because I am afraid that you will betray me. You may betray me, or you may not, but I don't know which, so I'll not risk it. Fear in any form stifles action, but in improvisation, fear stifles the creative process. Most fear is fear of the unknown, and like lighting up a dark room, knowledge dispels fear. So the more we know about the person we are being asked to trust, the easier it will be for us to give trust. From the first moment a new ensemble is together in one place, they begin the process of building knowledge of one another from within the group. In doing so, I lay the foundation for trust. Whew. This is from The Art of Play by Gary Izzo.
Good job, Gary.
Yeah.
Shout out to Gary.
This is a book on interactive theater in the chapter on improv. And like I think like if we haven't hammered home yet that trust is required for role play, like I think this quote here I think that does a really good job. And like trust is what I think, or what I have seen, be the biggest barrier like that stands in the way of playing to lift. Kind of, that fear of the possibility of betrayal. It's not even necessarily the fear of betrayal, right? It's the fear that you might get betrayed. You might get taken advantage of, but you're not sure. But yeah, once again, I guess in a more positive light, I hope that that if you really think about it, once again, roleplay is not a zero-sum game. The worst thing that can happen if you play to lift the scene, really truly, is that you make the scene better. And not only do you make the scene better, but you also telegraph to other people that like you're here to play together with them, right? You let others know by playing to lift that you're here to play together with them. And you are also establishing that, and by playing to lift, you're also taking part in establishing that trust with others. If you kind of clam up and like try to play for yourself, try to play to win, try to play to lose, then you're not necessarily broadcasting to others that you're here to cooperate with them. But if you are playing to lift, people will feel that you are here to cooperate with them, and you will create an environment for yourself that that is more pleasant to roleplay in.
It's true. So true. Even on the play and to lose side, like I have seen and heard a lot of players that have specifically openly admitted that they have made their character to lose, that everyone else around them is going to win in any scenario that they are involved in. And to me, that really broadcasted like they have already decided what they want to do. They have already decided that no matter what situation they're in, that they're not going to collaborate to figure out what is better for the situation that they're in. And for me, being a very situationally focused sort of person, I try to look for the themes. I try to look for the bigger picture, whether it's role play, whether it's work, whether it's like anything in life. I'm always looking at the bigger picture. That doesn't very well vibe with me because I see that as a signal of I have made the decision and I don't care what the context is later. So I always look for like the kind of players that will look for that context and will kind of build or build toward being able to decide based on that. And of course,
being like I'm always going to lose is like that's it is I would consider it a rather selfish decision, in the sense that I mean if you come at it from like like a PvP or like player v player mindset, then you might not think so, but like if we come at it from like a collaborative mindset, you'll notice that exactly as you said, the player has already decided what they're going to be doing, and they're not going to cooperate with anybody else. They're just going to do their thing and their thing only. It is a somewhat of a selfish choice to play like that. Not to say that you can't, but it is you are in that case not collaborating with others.
It's like sort of a virtue signal too, right?
Yeah, I think I made this mistake once. Not I guess so overtly, but I did end up making a character that I ended up enjoying a lot less than I could have. And this was Lillian Waypoint. I designed a character, and there were like I tried to make like two parts to the character, right? There was like the kind of the fun, like going around and having like high octane like ADHD bits like constantly. I was just like bouncing off the walls and like bouncing off of others and like kind of just being very hyper. Um, that was like one half of the character. The other half of the character that I really hoped, I was like really hoping to like explore was I had essentially intentionally set up the character to be like really super naive, and like I really wanted, I was really hoping that the character would be kind of exploited. Their naivety would be exploited because they had like a very obvious like weakness that was like a big red "please exploit me," and like nobody ended up doing so, and I ended up being, as time went on, I ended up being like more and more dissatisfied playing the character. And I had kind of like realized my mistake. My mistake was that like I thought I had made like two parts to this character, but really the only part that I was actually interested in playing was the playing to lose part, right? And I was actually significantly less interested in playing like the other part of my character, right? Significantly less interested. So then when like nobody ended up taking advantage of the character, I was left not having fun. And I feel like it was certainly at least partially my mistake. Um, right? Like, so to be fair, it was also like in an environment where like I think people were definitely not comfortable taking advantage of characters like that due to lack of communication. So that was like on the one hand, but on the other hand, now that I look back at it, like after the fact, I probably could have, played a character where I just like actually enjoyed playing all of the character rather than just the one part. When they lose, um, because requiring that you lose requires something of other people, right? You're essentially being like, okay, I need other people to do this thing for me, and that's like I guess the opposite of taking your fun into your own hands. That is taking your fun and putting it into other people's hands. Um,
Yeah. I'm I guess like a lot of that is very situational. Like it depends on the type of character that you play. But I guess also having time after time putting that sort of sign, the kick me sign on your back, right? Like this, I am naive,
it
right?
goes both ways. Like I will agree, it does go both ways here. I think. Um, I will, I will insist that like I think there were lots of opportunities for people to kind of like play to lift me, but the mistake that I had made was not realizing that I had made a character that I wouldn't enjoy. Um, I would only enjoy if other people lifted me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where that's once again, it's kind of like playing to lift goes both ways. It's not just expecting, right? It is explicitly not just expecting that other people will like lift you. You still have responsibility for your own fun. Um, Even though you want to be role playing in an environment where other people are lifting you, you still have responsibility for your own fun. It does go both ways.
Mm-hmm. So I think that covers everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, just about. I don't know. I
Yeah.
guess we could probably stall for time a little bit to see if anybody has any questions
Yeah. Well, we'll
while
go
we
ahead and
kind of wrap up.
do that. So if if there are any remaining questions that you guys want to ask, feel free. We've gone through a lot of stuff today, a lot of big topics too, like playing
Mm.
to different playing styles and like how you play to lift and using meta knowledge. Like meta knowledge is that is a whole conversation. We very much truncated that one, but that one can go on for hours, decades, millennia, even.
I can stall for time here by just providing some like improv resources, I suppose. I suppose it is currently, for if anybody is watching this as a recording, it's currently June 30th of 2024. So like this might change over time. But we're talking here about VR roleplay. Currently, if you want to do improv and VR chat, I suppose Solus has already shouted me out. I'm Silent. Hi. I do help run the Toolshed Roleplay Workshop, and one of the things we do at the Toolshed Roleplay Workshop is learn improv basics. Of course, we do slightly more than just learn improv basics, but that is one of the things that we do. If you want a more purely improv experience, the group Skits and Bits is a fantastic group in VR chat. They have workshops every Saturday, 6 p.m. EST. Wonderful group. I highly recommend them. It's where I got started, and it's just been a fantastic time and a lot of learning. And then finally, I don't think she's running any classes right now, but I have already mentioned by name Miss Dance. Miss Dance is a wonderful improv coach, and she runs essentially significantly more professional workshops because she is an actual like IRL improv coach. So like if you really want to learn from an expert, that's what she does. It's much significantly more of a boot camp than whatever I'm doing and what Skits and Bits is doing. But it's just fascinating to learn from her.
Did you want
And
to?
yeah,
Do you want to post some links?
some links. Sure, why not?
Okay, give me a sec. Let me know when you're ready, because I have to like
All
exclamation
right,
mark
yeah,
permit you.
I'm gonna gather all three of these
Okay,
things.
cool.
Just in case.
Yep. So I did. God, I want to echo just how goddamn talented Miss Dance is. I've known Miss Dance for like a few years, up to this point, and she does everything, I guess. Like she knows how to do like this really sort of like big stage level of like VR dancing. Some of you have seen like those people that like kind of infinite walk and kind of play space everywhere around everyone that's kind of watching them. It's just a really impressive performance. Yeah, she can do that. I think she's also a model maker. I'm actually not sure on that front. She also ports over and makes a bunch of maps that are like obnoxiously optimized. She's taken me on some tours through some of those, and my god. And then there's the improv stuff where she's got like, I don't know, 2 decades of experience running an improv theater. Like, God, she just does everything. It's crazy.
And I've had very long and very interesting conversations with her on kind of like improv and role play. And she kind of stands by like the theory that like roleplay is just improv. Now, I like 95% agree with this sentiment. I don't 100% agree with that sentiment. I have like my own reservations. But
I'm very close to agreeing.
but I am like 95% on board with roleplay is just improv.
Yeah.
And yeah. All right, I think I have all three Discord links. I have assembled the Triforce here.
All
And
right.
I'm ready to post. Let me know. All right, yeah. Woo. Oh no. Okay, I'm gonna do this again. We need to add line breaks. Line breaks.
How are you gonna line break in a Twitch chat?
I can't because it's identical to the one. Okay, never mind. Okay, we did our best.
Okay.
There are 3 links. The first one is The first one is the tool shed. The second one is skits and bits. The third one is for Miss Dance. Anyway, we did our best. Links and Twitch chat are hard.
Bam. There we go.
Thank you.
Perfect. Fixed.
There are, of course, other improv groups in VR chat. I wish I could shout out all of them, but alas, there are definitely too many. These are the ones that I've personally been at.
Well, there you go. There's some good shout outs. All right. I will also put the exclamation mark Couchform, as is tradition there. That all of this on the Couch podcast is based off of, and talking about the Couchform principles, which is our style of roleplay that focuses on building around a core theme, designing to support them, and playing to live the scenarios within it. See, we just talked about the last one there. So we've basically gone through kind of the core of Couchform at this point. We've completed the major elements. Not to say that the others are any less major, but these are kind of the ones that we have chosen to focus on quite specifically, and we have finally delved into all of those in very great detail, I think. It's very cool.
Yep.
All right, do you have any last shout outs?
I think that's all for today, I think.
Yeah, I don't have any shout outs either. So, that being said, thank you all for tuning in, checking out the podcast. And we'll see you all next time for On the Couch episode 5, where we talk about conflict and why you should embrace it and why it's great and
Yep.
helps forward the plot of your roleplay. Take care, everyone.